Okay, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Christa B. I'm from the Institute of Commercial Forensic Practitioners, or in short, the ICFP. I'm honored to join you today in the opening of the International Fraud Week. The theme for this week is fraud awareness. So we've got quite a busy week lying ahead of us. Tomorrow we've got Cynthia Skuman from the EPA and Prof. Ethel Williams from Stellenbosch University is going to look at ethics within a state of fraud and corruption, and we ask the question, is ethics that advantage will it reduce corruption? So on Thursday, I will be in Bloemfontein with Peter Louis Myburg to talk about his book, Gangsters State. And on Friday, we will be joined by Chad Thomas from IRS Forensics and Michelle Muwalal from Fabric to dissect the newest SAPS commercial crime stats. I don't know if you're aware of it, but it came out. The latest crime stats, commercial crime stats came out, I think it was during the weekend, Friday the weekend. And we also be looking at Fabric's 2019 annual crime stats. Quite interesting session there. So a special welcome to our three presenters for today. It's Mandy Wiener. We have Brian Adams, not the Brian Adams singer. Brian, you're not the famous singer. And then Dr. Johan Erasmus from Deloitte. So I'd also like to thank our partner for today's event, and that is Sanlam. Without them, we couldn't have hosted this event. So thank you, Sanlam, specifically the forensic division at Sanlam. And then to all Sanlam employees, a warm welcome. I hope you enjoy the session. On the logistical side, just a few issues. Please keep your videos off and mute your sound. We will be using the chat option. Just open your chat option and you can ask questions to the facilitator on that side. But let me introduce you to our facilitator for today, it's Frenelle Noble. Frenelle is a member of the ICFP KZN Regional Committee, which is the subcommittee of the ICFP board. She's an SA, and she's also a CFE, and she started a career at the SIU and later joined PwC, where she moved up to the ranks of a senior manager. Frenelle worked on a number of high-profile investigations in Lesotho, Swaziland, and Zimbabwe, and has been involved in a number of investigations for National and Provincial Treasury and the DPCI. So without any further delay, Frenelle, I hand over to you.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Today we're going to have hopefully a very stimulating conversation regarding whistleblowers and their role. I'm going to take the time to introduce our panel for today. The first is Mandy Wiener. She is one of South Africa's best known and most credible journalists and authors. She has worked as a multi-award-winning reporter since 2004. The Whistleblowers is her fifth book, which presents the raw and evocative accounts of SA's whistleblowers told in their own voices and from their own perspectives. Her other books include Ministry of Crime and Underworld Explored, Behind the Door, the Oscar Pistorius and Reeva Steenkamp story with Barry Bateman, My Second Initiation, a memoir with Vusi Piccoli, the former head of the National Prosecuting Authority, and the groundbreaking Killing Kebble and Underworld Explored. At this point, I'd like to mention that Sanlam is giving away 5 of her books, The Whistleblowers, as prizes. Unfortunately, employees of the forensics department at Sanlam are not allowed to enter as they sponsored the prizes. Our second panel member is Brian Adams. He is a certified ethics officer and a pioneer member of the Ethics Practitioners Association, and he started anonymous reporting services in South Africa in 2000. He is known as the ethics architect and is passionate about assisting clients to build ethical businesses and defeat the concerted attack of workplace crime. He achieves this through his innovative reporting service called Be Heard, and through his unique ethics surveys, consulting, and training. Brian has been running his own businesses since mid-1996, and he has written a popular book, Of Course You Can, which aims to share the lessons that he has learned on his own, sometimes bumpy journey. Our third panel member is Dr. Johan Erasmus. who is the Chief Ethics Officer for Deloitte Africa. He is also the regulatory and public policy leader for the firm and serves as the director responsible for governance in Deloitte's audit technical team. He is a regulatory analyst with a special focus on the New Companies Act, the King Code, and consumer protection legislation. He has a wide experience in the legislative process, ranging from policy making to the drafting and promulgation of legislation. He has also been involved in the establishment of sector regulators and the design of measures to ensure effective enforcement. Okay. As I stated earlier, to get the ball rolling, Sanlam is giving away 5 of the whistleblowers. So to start off, the first 2 people to answer the question, who are the partners for today's webinar, will win the whistleblowers. I'll leave that for Chris to identify who the winners are. Oh, so that's it.
Thanks, Fernel. The answers are coming through. So I'll be announcing the names at the end of the session. Thank you.
Okay. All right. Before we begin the presentation from Mandy Wiener, our first poll question to get a feel of people's views is, do you consider whistleblowers to be heroes or traitors? Okay, so while people are answering the poll question, I'll hand over to Mandy Wiener for her presentation.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. Thank you so much to the ICFP and to Sanlam as well. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the results there of the preaching to the converted here today, because 97% of you think that whistleblowers are heroes. Only 3% of you seem to think that whistleblowers are traitors. So that's very encouraging. It's a great start. So thank you for that. I'm going to share a presentation as a start, and I just hope that you can all see it. Give me 1 second. Okay, brilliant. Can you, Fernel, can you just tell me, is that fine? Can everybody see that?
Yes.
Okay, brilliant.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, excellent. So I'm going to speak to some of the microphones are still on. I think you might want to use them. I think Leon and Fernel, your microphones are still on. Great. Okay, so thank you so much for having me today. I have written this book called The Whistleblowers, which the screen is over there. And it's a bit of a departure for me from what I usually write about, which is organized crime and gangsters. And I think that I thought that it was a departure, but it really wasn't actually, because I ended up exploring many of these cases which involved organized crime and murders and that kind of thing. But the way that this book came about was that I met one whistleblower, and this whistleblower wanted to write a book, and I had several meetings with them, and they were anonymous. They remain anonymous today, and they were toing and froing about whether or not they should come forward, whether or not they should step into the light. And ultimately, they got cold feet and decided not to. So that book never happened. So I was intrigued though, because this person had a really strong impression on me, and I realized what was at stake, what the contribution of whistleblowers was, but also what they had sacrificed and what their experience had been in South Africa as a whistleblower. So I started ferreting out other whistleblowers and speaking to them and listening to their stories. And, you know, we all know about the arms deal. We all know about state capture. It didn't take 2 minutes before my son walked into the room. I mean, this is a classic 2020 moment. So I'm so sorry. I have to tie his karate belt. I'm so sorry. Give me 1 second, because this is what happens in 2020. Okay, so that's what happens. I'm so sorry about that, but I'm sure you've all been there, and this is the way the world works at the moment. So I decided to write this book about whistleblowers, and I started speaking to various whistleblowers about their experiences and what their contributions had been. And the result is this book. And it is by no means an exhaustive look at all the whistleblowers in South Africa. There were no clear criteria around who should be included. There are many people that perhaps should have been included, many that the public believes should not have been included. But I just wanted to give a cross-section of experiences, of good experiences, of bad experiences in the public sector, in the corporate environment, in politics. And that was the starting point for me in terms of this book and how I decided to write it. So as a starting point, I looked at the definition of what a whistleblower is in South Africa, in the world. And interestingly, it actually comes from the 19th century, when police officers literally used to have a whistle and used to blow the whistle to alert the public about some kind of criminal. So that's the origin. But the definition itself is actually quite narrow in terms of defining what a whistleblower is. And generally, it's somebody within an organization, which is where it gets kind of tricky with the law, as many of you will know, because it's somebody within an organization who raises a concern to somebody in authority about something illegal that has happened in an organization, in a business, in government. It's very much in terms of within the organization. So then where does that leave people who blow the whistle about some kind of police misconduct if they are just a regular man in the street? So sometimes that definition gets confusing because it's so narrow. So that was the starting point for me, was what is a whistleblower actually? Because many people don't understand this. And I spent some time defining a whistleblower and who falls into this category and who doesn't. And there's a big distinction between a whistleblower and a civil servant that's doing their job, somebody who is making sure that illegal activity does not happen. And we have many examples of that in South Africa, where you have people who just do their jobs to ensure that fraud does not take place. It doesn't make them a whistleblower, it just makes them a diligent and loyal civil servant. And that's the difference. And we've noticed in South Africa over the past few years a rise in prominence of whistleblowers. And this isn't unique to South Africa. In fact, I spent some time looking at the situation in America as well, where we've really seen a period of sweeping corruption. We've seen more and more fraud and corruption being committed, and a normalization of fraud. And this, coupled with a more entrenched culture of secrecy, has seen more and more whistleblowers coming forward. So if you look at Transparency International's Global Corruption Barometer from last year, it just shows that citizens in South Africa believe that corruption is getting worse. 70% believe that government wasn't doing enough to tackle the problem. And what's interesting for me is how many citizens are willing to pay a bribe just to get access to essential services, which is very concerning. PwC's Global Economic Crime and Fraud Survey also showing that 42 of the respondents didn't conduct any investigations following a report. And many of you who work in this environment will know how concerning this is in many instances. And what we see often in America or in the UK is a prominence of whistleblowers. So we see people like Catherine Gunn in the UK. We see people like Edward Snowden who get this high profile and we know about them. But of late, there's also been other whistleblowers. So for example, with COVID-19, there was an ophthalmologist in China who blew the whistle on the fact that COVID-19 was a thing and landed up dying from it. And he was really vilified by the government there. Similarly, with the Ukraine investigation in the US, we saw Donald Trump really vilifying the whistleblower there. But we are seeing a definite golden age of whistleblowing, where we're seeing more and more whistleblowers coming forward because there's more and more fraud and corruption being committed as well. And in South Africa, we've seen whistleblowers certainly over the past 2 decades or so, even before that. But with state capture and this era of state capture, we have seen a rise in prominence of whistleblowers. So in the Zuma era, when we saw the capture of state-owned entities, but also law enforcement agencies, we saw an evisceration, a hollowing out of these agencies. And as a result of that, and what was happening with the Guptas at Eskom, at PRASA, we saw a necessity for insiders, some of which had a proximity to wrongdoing, some of which were merely motivated by doing the right thing and altruistic motives. We saw more and more people coming to the Zondo Commission. And my sense is that once you had 1, 2 of these, you had Mcebisi, Jonas, Themba Maseko, Fakey Mentor, all of these people coming forward, it kind of opened the gates for more and more people to follow. So because there was so much capture during that state capture era, estimated R1 trillion lost to the fiscus just from malfeasance and wrongdoing, we've seen this necessity for whistleblowers to come forward. And we've seen so many of them coming to the Zondo Commission, from Cynthia Stimple and Dr. Doji at SAA to Bianca Goodson, who blew the whistle on R1 trillion. We've seen Angelo Grizzi, who I'll talk about as well, who blew the whistle there about Bosasa. We've seen these anonymous whistleblowers who were the drivers at PRASA and at Transnet, talking about delivering bags of cash. It's all pretty dramatic stuff that's straight out of a fiction novel. But all of this has been happening at the Zondo Commission, where we've seen so many more whistleblowers coming forward because of the extent of the capture that was going on. And the primary example of whistleblowing in South Africa is the Gupta leaks. So the Gupta leaks I cover in the book as well, and it's just a remarkable story because here you've got the situation where for years you had these brothers who arrived in the country from Saharistan, who had developed all of these deeply interconnected networks with the powerful in the country, who were really getting away with all kinds of things like landing planes at Waterkloof and taking over coal mines. And then what essentially happened was you have this hard drive that is from within the very belly of the Gupta Empire, landing in the lap of these 2 whistleblowers who remain anonymous until today, Stan and John. And they come across this hard drive and they start fiddling around with it, and they realize that there's something on here, and that it is all of these emails from within the heart of the Gupta Empire. And Stan takes a look at this and he starts scrolling through them, and he sees former President Jacob Zuma on TV, and he does that trademark laugh of his. And for Stan, this was the trigger that kind of pushed him over the edge. So he prints out some of these emails, he has a look at them, and he thinks, well, I've got to do something, but who do I take it to? And this is often the problem for whistleblowers is, well, what do I do with it? So he then starts to make inquiries through people that he knows in the media. He then phones a member of parliament for the Democratic Alliance, and he asks him to come and meet him, and they make an arrangement to meet at a coffee shop. and this MP just doesn't rock up. So he misses out on the biggest scoop potentially of his political career. And then Stan goes to the Mail and Guardian on a Saturday morning, and he does this whole scouting routine to make sure that he's not being followed, and he arrives there and the Mail and Guardian's closed on a Saturday. So he doesn't know what to do with it. And again, this is a problem that many whistleblowers have. And eventually he reaches out to someone who he knows, who puts him in touch with Brian Curran, who is an international human rights lawyer. And Brian meets with him and has a look at some of these emails, and then reaches out to Mark Haywood, who is from the Right to Know campaign. And then he then relays this to Branko from the Daily Maverick and Stefans from Amabungani. And it's this crazy story that happens when eventually they get the hard drive and are able to have a look at this hard drive, and it contains hundreds of thousands of emails which detail the intrinsic workings of the state capture network that the Guptas were behind. And it was as a result of that ultimately brought down a president. It's because Stan had decided that he couldn't just sit with this hard drive. He had to do something with it. And he became a whistleblower. But then you also had, in the capacity of Brian Curran, somebody who acted as an intermediary here to hand over this hard drive so that the media could get access to it. And that's why these sources, these whistleblowers, are so crucial to us as journalists. But then there's the whole other story about how the Sunday Times then were leaked a portion of the emails and broke the story unexpectedly while Stan and John were still in the country, and compromised their safety. And the difference between how the Daily Maverick and Amabungani treated Stan and John and ensured their safety and made sure that they were supported before breaking these stories, and the way that the Sunday Times handled it, they didn't care about the implications for the whistleblowers. They just wanted to get the story out there. But it's a great example of how whistleblowers need to be protected, and how just the regular man can make such a difference. Many people say that this is not a great example of how whistleblowers are treated, but for me, it's a great example of what can be achieved through whistleblowing, where until today, Stan and John remain anonymous. Their lives are not the same as they once were, but they have made an enormous contribution. We would never know about what went on, these inner workings, about the details of the capture, the Dubai laundry, that a lot of money was channeled through, a lot of the cases coming out of the Free State with the asbestos project and with Estina Dairy Farm, Musabenzi Swani, and all of that comes from the Gupta leaks, and it's absolutely crucial. And that's why I think it's such a great example of whistleblowing in South Africa and what can be achieved by it. And again, Estina is something that is mentioned very much in the Gupta leaks. And I went to Freda in the Free State to go and interview Dr. Khadebe, who is this man here standing outside of the Freda dairy farm. And it's a very tragic story, because Dr. Khadebe is one of those guys, and there are many of them that I speak of, who is just a diligent civil servant who realized that there was something going on here and that he needed to make a noise about it. And he heard about this idea that the Free State government wanted to bring this dairy farm to Freda, and he thought, no, they're definitely cooking something up here. There's something dodgy going on. So he started asking around, he started visiting the farm regularly, he got the workers on site to speak to him, and he began to realize that they weren't looking after the cattle were dying, they were dumping them in the town's water supply, a river that was running through the farm. And then he got hold of the Mail and Guardian and contacted them, and they came out and they realized that there was a problem and published an article. And that was the spark for all the media reporting around the Estina dairy farm. And the fact that all of the money that was supposed to go to the intended beneficiaries of the Estina dairy farm actually went to the Guptas to pay for their Sun City wedding, which is crazy if you think about it. Instead of paying the money to the intended beneficiaries, Musabenzi Zwane's church choir went on a jaunt overseas. And then I spoke to some of the intended beneficiaries as well, who have nothing today. They handed over their ID numbers, they handed over their details, and instead of getting any portion of the land, they were just used. And many of them spoke out very publicly about this. They went on TV. And one of those was a man called Philemon Boye-Ngwenya. And he went on TV regularly to talk about this. And he then died under very mysterious circumstances. He was found dead in a shack which overlooks the Vrede dairy farm. And I spoke to his daughter Loliwe as well, and she believes that he was killed for blowing the whistle. But we would never know about it if it wasn't for people like Boye-Ngwenya or people like Dr. Khadebe, who was a DA councillor who felt that he needed to blow the whistle and expose it. The Guptas would have gotten away with that if it hadn't been for him. And another state capture example is Mosilo Motepo, who was at Trillian, and Bianca Goodson, who's photographed here. And Bianca Goodson jokes that her family refers to her as the McKinsey Slayer. And here you've got an example of Bianca Goodson and Mosilo Motepo, who are both very successful Black women who had made their name in the corporate environment. And in the case of Bianca Goodson, she was working at Anglo, she was very comfortable, her life was really cruising along, she was engaged, she had a daughter, and out of the blue, she was given this job offer to go work at Trillian. And she only landed up working there for 3 months. But during that period, she realized that what was going on wasn't right, that there were alarm bells ringing for her, and she decided to resign after 3 months. But it took her a long time to decide to actually blow the whistle on what was going on with Trillian and McKinsey and Eskom. The fact that Trillian was merely acting as a placeholder and McKinsey was using it as a front. And the reason it took Bianca Goodson such a long time was because her support system didn't back her. Her husband, her parents, her pastor, they all told her that she shouldn't muddy the water, she shouldn't rock the boats, that she shouldn't come forward, it was too risky. And for over a year, she decided not to blow the whistle. And eventually she realized that she just couldn't stand by. Her marriage broke down. She realized that she had post-traumatic stress disorder. Mosilo Motepo landed up on the front page of the Sunday Times because she went to the public protector and blew the whistle. And as a result, she was criminally charged by the Hawks for this. And Trillian laid charges against her. So Bianca was looking at all of this and thought, well, I'm really not going to risk it. But eventually she felt that she had to. And she came forward and she helped Jeff Budlinder with his investigation into Trillian. She helped the public protector. And then she went to the parliamentary inquiry and she testified there. And as a result of what Bianca exposed, 1.6 billion rand was returned to the fiscus through the court cases. 1.6 billion rand. And today she is unemployed, she's unemployable, she has PTSD. And it sadly is one of those examples of an enormous contribution that a whistleblower can make. She's a patriotic South African who has made this contribution and has held power to account and has put herself out there on a very public platform. In fact, what happened when she was at Sage, she was working there when she put her entire Trillian server on the web and she went completely public. And her bosses at Sage knew about it, and she sent them an email on the day that she blew the whistle saying, I'm offering to resign. And instead of lauding her for what she had done and making her, the forensic head, or putting her on the board or promoting her, Sage accepted her resignation. And she's been unemployed since then, and she's really struggling to find work. Unfortunately, there are these stories where people have made these contributions, have come forward, have blown the whistle, have done the right thing, but are paying the cost and really seeing the consequences on a personal level. And perhaps the most contentious one of these, aside from Angelo Grizi at the State Capture Commission, has been Suzanne Daniels. And Suzanne describes herself as an accidental whistleblower. She was the company secretary, the head of legal at Eskom for a long time, and she had a proximity to wrongdoing. She sat in on the board meetings. She could see what was going on. She knew what was happening with the Optimum deal, that there were all of these red flags that were popping up for her. She was there when Lynn Brown was the minister, and she had to face questions from journalists about what was going on. And for a long time, she just went along with it, and she didn't do anything about it. And that has been the criticism for her, is that she was too quiet for too long. She, however, feels that she didn't know who she could blow the whistle to. The board was captured, the minister was captured, the police were captured. She didn't know what to do. And she then decided to blow the whistle. She started leaking documents to journalists. She also then went to Parliament and testified at the parliamentary inquiry into Eskom. And when she testified at the Zondo Commission, she really had a tough time of it. Public sentiment was very much against her. She spoke about, firstly, this meeting at Melrose Arch that she went to, where one of the Gupta brothers was barefoot. Duduzane Zuma was there. There was a cabinet minister there. And there was all of this talk about the state capture project. She then speaks about how Salim Essa, one of the Gupta lieutenant at a petrol station, offered her 800 million rand to ensure Brian Molefe could be returned as the Eskom CEO. And then after that, she went to another meeting at Melrose Arch, and Judge Zondo just couldn't believe that she went there out of morbid curiosity. So she really took a bit of a beating at Zondo. She, however, describes herself as an accidental whistleblower, that she didn't set out to become a whistleblower, and that she didn't come out sooner because she didn't know who to come out to, and it took a long time for her to connect the dots. And again, today, she definitely suffers from the trauma of what she's been through and is broke. Her house and her car at risk of being repossessed. And she, too, has given us insight into what happened at Eskom, what happened with the Guptas, what was going on. And as a result of her whistleblowing, we have a better understanding of what exactly those machinations were. And how so much money was lost from Eskom, was siphoned off, and how the infrastructure has just collapsed there as well as a result of Suzanne Daniels' whistleblowing. And then perhaps the most talked about and contentious whistleblower that I interviewed, and I call him a whistleblower, although many people believe that he is not, is Angelo Grisi. And his book has also come out last week, in which he speaks about himself as a whistleblower and how his current developments in his bail denial send such a strong message to whistleblowers to not come forward. So Angelo Grisi, the Chief Operations Officer at Bosasa, has this Damascus moment while he's lying in a hospital bed with oxygen mask and tubes coming out of his body, pretty much like he is right now, but this was a few years ago. And his daughter confronts him and says, this has got to stop. And he agrees. He says, it's enough. I've got to put an end to it. All of this corruption has been going on. He insists he was doing it on behalf of Gavin Watson, who was the CEO of Bosasa. And he starts then leaking to the media. He starts blowing the whistle. He issues a statement to the media that he is going to expose Bosasa. And he styles himself as this whistleblower. He goes to the State Capture Commission and he drops the files. He shows videos of Gavin Watson handing over the cash. He tells us about the Nomvula Mokanyane's birthday parties and the bribe packs and the booze and the security systems that have been put in at Gwede Mantashe's house and everywhere else. And he just drops it all. And many people argue that Angelo Grisi is not a whistleblower. But if you look at the legal definition of it, if it's somebody within an organization who decides that they are going to go to an authority and expose wrongdoing, then many would argue that he is a whistleblower. And even if he has a proximity to wrongdoing and he has some kind of complicity, then he remains a whistleblower. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, whether or not you think that Angelo Grietti is a whistleblower or not. Some people have been very public about saying that he isn't. I think what happened with his bail application is that the National Prosecuting Authority looked at him and felt that he would not be a credible witness. There were simply too many lies. And they decided that they were going to prosecute him as the main accused and that he would not be a witness. My argument is that you can be a whistleblower without being a witness. The two are not mutually exclusive. Is that just because you're a whistleblower, it doesn't mean you will be a witness in a court of law. So I think that the NPA decided he's just not going to be credible enough and they are going to prosecute him, and that's why they denied him bail. But I maintain that he is still a whistleblower according to the definition. So this is my rather broad, I cast the net quite wide on who is a whistleblower and who isn't. And again, not everybody agrees with this according to the experts that I've interviewed. And I believe that there is a spectrum of whistleblowers. I think on the one end, you've got people who are noble, who are virtuous, who act out of altruistic motives, people who firmly believe it's black or white. Any transgression is a transgression. And I'm sure many of you would fall into this category considering, what kind of line of work you do, where, you believe that anything that is wrong needs to be brought to book, and it's black or white. And these are people who are on one end of the whistleblowing spectrum. They are doing the right thing. They simply cannot allow for anything wrong to happen. Somewhere in the middle, you've got the accidental whistleblowers, people who don't set out to become whistleblowers. They just are carrying on with their lives. They are doing their jobs. They start to realize that there is some kind of fraud that is happening, and they become witness to it. They become aware of it. If they remain quiet, then they will become complicit. So they realize that they are in a catch-22 and they've got to come forward and blow the whistle. And they become accidental whistleblowers. And they're in the middle there. On the far end is the more controversial category, where I believe that there are people who have a proximity to wrongdoing. They are complicit. They are involved. They are part of the syndicate. And sometimes, when you're investigating this kind of stuff, you need people who are on the inside, particularly in an organized crime syndicate, in some kind of collusion. You need the people who are on the inside to come forward. And that's where you find the people like the Angelo Grietti, who have some kind of Damascus moments. They decide, for whatever reason, that they are going to blow the whistle and come clean. And that's pretty much what Angelo Grietti did. On his own version, he says he was acting out of self-preservation, that if he didn't, do it, then he would go down too. And you have many people like this who become whistleblowers, who are saving their own asses by coming forward and handing over the evidence. And these are people who become Section 204 witnesses, who get plea deals in terms of the Criminal Procedure Act. And my view is that they remain whistleblowers. I know many people disagree with that, but I am curious to hear from you. Maybe you can post in the chat if you think that they are whistleblowers or not. But that is the definition as far as I'm concerned, and they should still be treated as whistleblowers. So something that I spent a lot of time thinking about while I was researching this book was, well, if there are many people who have the same information, and they're all sitting together and they all know what's going on, why does it take one person to blow the whistle and phone the hotline and raise the alarm when so many other people choose to look away? And I asked many of the whistleblowers that I interviewed about this, and I also asked many of the executives what they think it is. And it was different in every instance. I found that many of the people I interviewed had some kind of religious affiliation or some strong kind of moral purpose. Many of them had a strong single mother. Many of them had just a strong awareness of right or wrong. They were empathetic. Some of them felt like they had to do the right thing by the company, that there was a professional code that they had to follow. Yet the company didn't always see it like that. They saw that it was a betrayal, that they were troublemakers. They felt that they just had to do it out of a sense of personal justice. And then for some people, it was personal gain. For some people, it was they felt betrayed. They had some kind of vendetta. They wanted to save themselves. So there are various reasons that people choose to come forward. And there is a lot of academic research around this as well. What compels one person to come forward when other people choose not to? And it's different in all of the instances that I looked at. But for most of the whistleblowers, they fall into that category of they are just fastidious and meticulous, and that any transgression is a transgression. If you look at somebody like Moss Parkway, who was a councillor in Rustenburg, who spoke out against corruption and was shot in his driveway as a result of his speaking out. Here's an example of a guy who is just a solid civil servant who would sit in council meetings and look at every single line of expenses and make sure that every cent went to the right place. And many of the whistleblowers are people like that who just look at every single detail. They're meticulous, and there can't be any transgression at all. But it's different in every case around what motivates a whistleblower. Sometimes it is just a sense of personal gain. And then in South Africa, the other issue that I spent a lot of time looking at as well is, well, how do we support whistleblowers? How do we protect them? What kind of framework is in place to encourage whistleblowers to come forward? So many of the experts that I interviewed and many of the whistleblowers that I interviewed were not very generous in their praise of the legal framework in South Africa. The main law in South Africa, which protects whistleblowing, is the Protected Disclosures Act of 2000. It was amended in 2017 to broaden the definition of a whistleblower around whether it's an employee or a contract worker, and it also broadened the definition around who a whistleblower could report to. So there has been praise for the widening of the definition, but the actual law itself is seen as very much a labor-based law. And for this reason, it doesn't work in practice. So those whistleblowers who aren't employed by an institution, who decide to lay it all on the line, are not protected by it. It does ensure that companies have to implement a policy around whistleblowing, but the biggest censure that a company could face is 2 years of a person's salary. So it's just not seen as something practical for a whistleblower, that it doesn't provide enough protection. There are other laws as well in South Africa in terms of the Labour Relations Act and other pieces of legislation. But the primary one is the PDA, which you may have different views on, but many of the people I spoke to just felt that it failed in terms of properly protecting whistleblowers, and it just didn't provide enough support. It was seen as flawed in many, many ways. One of the suggestions, and I look at various suggestions from Ghana, from the UK, from the Netherlands, from the US, and there's a lot of talk around the False Claims Act, which is also called the Lincoln Law in the US. And the False Claims Act allows for whistleblowers and allows for independent citizens in the US to go after companies as a whistleblower in a civil claim, and they then get a financial reward of between 15% to 30% of the collected proceeds. So a couple of weeks ago in the US, the biggest payment ever was paid out to a whistleblower of $121 million to an anonymous whistleblower. And there are pros and cons to this. There are lots of people who are in favor of this. I know there are many people who are against it too. And it's a discussion that people have been having recently around whistleblowers because of this narrative of so many of the state capture whistleblowers who are now broke, who are unemployed. Many of them have appealed to banks to give them some kind of reprieve because they are left financially destitute and unemployed. So if you look at the False Claims Act in the US in 2018, if you look at those numbers of whistleblower reports that were received and the amount of money paid out, So the pros in that argument is that it entices whistleblowers to come forward, it offers a financial reward, but then the negatives, of course, are that you have sinister motives, a lot of people coming out with nonsense stories. You see a lot of debt collectors, a lot of dodgy lawyers who are also chasing the financial reward as well. So it does taint the process in some ways, but I look forward to hearing your comments on that. But this is a conversation that people are having around whether this kind of financial reward is something that we should be looking at in South Africa. And do we even have the money? And then, you know, would a percentage of that then be paid to a whistleblower? The other alternative is something that they've done in the Netherlands, which is what is called a whistleblower house. And this is the structure that I'm more in favor of, where you have an organization which is run like a Chapter 9 organization. So it is independent. It could be run by civil society, but it is funded by government, or possibly funded by various sectors of industry. And this provides support beyond financial support. So it offers security, it offers financial support, it offers psychological support, legal support, because what a lot of the whistleblowers say is that if they are taken up by an organization like PLUF, which has supported many of the state capture organizations, it is French funded, but a local organization, they then sign a contract and their legal costs are protected, but they don't have money to go see a psychologist. They don't have money to pay rent because many of them are unemployed. So something like a whistleblower house might make more sense in terms of an independent institution that provides the support to the whistleblowers. The other option is looking at some kind of witness protection. So I tell the story in the book of one of the KwaZulu-Natal whistleblowers who has spent a lot of time blowing the whistle on corruption and political assassinations. And in fact, he had to actually go to court to force the police minister to give him security. However, he was put into witness protection, into the NPA's witness protection units, and he only lasted like 4 or 5 days because it's just not practical. So there needs to be more of a discussion around what is practical for whistleblowers and how they can be better supported and secured. So if you look now, last week, Ace Makashule's personal assistant has now decided to turn state witness. She's in America. So she's a witness, so she gets this protection from the state if necessary. But unless you're actually a complainant or a witness in a criminal trial, you're not entitled to get any protection from the state, which does leave whistleblowers completely exposed. So I'm in favor of something like this, a whistleblower house like they've set up in the Netherlands. Some people raise concerns around that there shouldn't be any kind of proximity to government, that government shouldn't be funding it or be involved at all. But I do think we need more civil society organizations. At the moment, we have OUTA, Corruption Watch supports whistleblowers. We used to have a dedicated whistleblower organization, which has since closed down. Also, the Right to Know campaign no longer supports whistleblowers. The Ahmed Kathrada Foundation assists in terms of the legislation, but doesn't actually support whistleblowers. So there are not enough civil society organizations that support whistleblowers currently. And then in the last few weeks, we've really seen this conversation around the protection and reward of whistleblowers gathering momentum. And I hope it is because of my book to a degree. But off the back of that, Bianca Goodson, who I spoke about earlier, wrote an open letter to Andre de Ruyter, the CEO of Eskom, because of Bianca's whistleblowing. As I said, 1.6 billion rand was returned to the fiscus and to Eskom. So she looked at the False Claims Act in the United States and said, you know, would you consider giving me a portion of that money? Because I'm unemployed, I have lost my income, I suffer from PTSD. But then she took it further and she escalated it to the president, because she acknowledged that Andre de Ruyter was not the right person for her to be addressing this to. The president was. And she argued that we need to have the societal revolution in how we treat whistleblowers. And this conversation really is gathering momentum now, because if you look at her case, if you look at Cynthia Stimple from SAA, if you look at Suzanne Daniels, you've got all of these people who are making this noise, who are making us all aware of the fraud and corruption, but they are not being rewarded personally. And that is really what I want to advocate for as part of this book. My biggest concern was that people would read this book and they would think, hell, I'm never blowing the whistle. People end up dead. And that is not what I want to encourage. I want to encourage people to come forward, but then we need to change the way we treat whistleblowers in South Africa. At the moment, whistleblowers walk around with the scarlet letter W. They are unemployed, they're unemployable, they are pushed to the fringes of society. Many of them are seen as troublemakers, as pariahs. In South Africa, we've got this history of impimpis, of people who are seen as disloyal, who are betraying you. And unfortunately, we still see a lot of organizations who treat whistleblowers that way, where we see them as problematic, where they are rocking the boat, they are disruptive, and often it sparks a witch hunt. And if we are going to encourage whistleblowers to come forward, which we 100% need, if we are going to fight corruption and fraud, then we need to have a societal revolution. We should be applauding them, we should be celebrating them, we shouldn't be treating them as problematic. And that's what Bianca's argued for in her letter to the president. And she spent a lot of time in the media doing interviews about this, and I support her 100% on it, because I think that we need to have these advocates who are going to motivate for a change in legislation, but also a change in culture and society. At the moment, we're still seeing a lot of barriers to people coming forward to blowing the whistle. I quote in the book research that has been done by Gibbs and the Nottingham School of Business, and this is research that is not published yet. They kindly allowed me access to it. So I've quoted it quite a bit in the book around what motivates whistleblowers, what they think of the PDA, but they also looked at what the barriers are to blowing the whistle. And primary amongst this is fear. In many instances, it's fear. So they have fear of losing their jobs. They have fear of financial insecurity, fear of being victimized. Many of them are not supported by their families. And I spoke to a number of them who've had fallings out with their families. They fear that they will be disloyal to the company. They feel that they are breaching confidentiality. They don't trust the hotline. They don't trust the system. They fear that nothing will be done. So what's the point? I'm going to risk all of this and then nothing is going to actually happen. So predominantly fear is the barrier to blowing the whistle. And that's where we need to be concerned, because we need to address that. And how do you dissipate that fear to motivate more whistleblowers to come forward? How do you address them, that they are not going to lose their job, that they will remain financially secure, that they will be appreciated and applauded, that they're doing the right thing, and that they are seen as loyal for disclosing any kind of wrongdoing that they come across? So those are the barriers that prevent people. And something that I'm sure many of you will be interested in, and I take quite a cynical view of this, is that we see many corporates coming out and saying, oh, but we've got this hotline, it's run by an auditing firm, and I can't wait for the response to this one from the panelists. But many of the people that I speak to say that the hotlines are a tick box exercise, that they're there, it's doing the right thing. And I think, again, it's a bit of a catch-22, because what happens with many of the hotlines, according to the investigators I've spoken to, is that people do the tip-off, they remain anonymous, they don't give enough information. And then the investigators start looking at it, but they haven't got the right information to pursue it. And then it often triggers a witch hunt, because it goes back to the company. The hotline says, well, we've got this tip-off, this is what it's about, and then they start investigating who was responsible for the tip-off, rather the allegation of fraud. The investigators start looking at the wrong thing. I know that there are examples of technology with a reference number where people can log in and you can share information anonymously that way. I personally am quite cynical about hotlines. I know that many of the whistleblowers that I spoke to are also cynical. There's a story of the pensions, the unclaimed benefits in the book, which speaks about the FSCA and Liberty, and that involves a tip-off as well to a hotline, and Michelle Mitchley lost her job as a result of that. So there are definitely views from the whistleblowers that it doesn't work, but I look forward to your comments on that afterwards. You can post on the chat too, if you're willing to, about whether or not you think that the hotlines work. But for me, the biggest issue is how to change the corporate culture and how to encourage people to speak up. And that comes with developing a corporate speak up culture. And within organizations, assuring employees that it's the right thing to do, that they should come forward, that they need to expose fraud, and they need to hold their colleagues accountable, and that there won't be a witch hunt and they won't be victimized or vilified for doing it. And that, unfortunately, isn't the case at all corporates. And along with that change in culture comes an acknowledgement, a reward for the people. That they need to be given protection. You need to know as a whistleblower that if I come forward, I won't lose my job. I won't be hunted down. I will be acknowledged. I'll be promoted. I'll be rewarded that I've done the right thing. And again, I absolutely want to encourage whistleblowers to come forward. I don't want them to look at what I'm saying or what I've written and say, there's no ways I'm going to do this. And the only way we are going to encourage people to come forward is if we stack the cards in their favor. And we need to have this belief that whistleblowing is sexy, that it shouldn't be stigmatized, that people shouldn't be treated as pariahs or troublemakers. If you look at the story of Catherine Gunn in the UK, there was a movie made about her. Edward Snowden, there's books written about him and movies made about him. And in South Africa, we just don't have that culture where we acknowledge and celebrate and reward whistleblowers. In my view, people who expose corporate fraud should be given jobs as ethics officers on boards of companies. They should have more integrity than anybody else. And in the book, one of the whistleblowers that I interview actually issues this challenge to corporate South Africa, to the CEOs, to say, stand up and employ these people. It's crazy that there are so many whistleblowers from the state capture era who have done the right thing, who have exposed this massive fraud, and they remain unemployed today because they're tainted by what they've done. So we've got to stack the cards in their favor. We've got to change the legislation. We have to encourage them. We have to support them. And the only way we can do that is if we change the culture and the law and the framework and how we treat whistleblowers in the country. Because everybody's got the capacity to speak up, to be a whistleblower. And as I mentioned, in some instances, you've got people who have just got that personality, who are just compelled to do the right thing. But what is it that makes one person speak up when all the other people in the room know what's going on and they choose to look the other way? And it really is about ensuring that all of those people that know what's going on can speak up and feel empowered to speak up, because we all have the capacity to speak truth to power, and we need that in the country now more than ever. We're fighting this horrible scourge of corruption. Corruption Watch said that in the first 6 months of this year, 2,000 whistleblowers came forward to blow the whistle on PPE corruption, which is frightening, but also massively encouraging. The fact that 2,000 people were willing to report fraud and this COVID-preneur nonsense that was going on. And we need to encourage more and more people to come forward, because everybody has got the capacity to speak truth to power. We just need to encourage that and ensure that people do that. And if you are thinking of blowing the whistle, every single one of the whistleblowers that I've interviewed for the book, I ask them to give advice. And some of it is quite practical. So some of it is keep a diary, keep the phone records, make sure you have a copy of all of the evidence, make sure you share that evidence with someone. You know, with the Gupta leaks, they gave a copy of the Gupta leaks clandestinely late at night in the middle of a farm to Mark Hayward, and then it was put, a copy of the original was put into a safe and kept in an undisclosed location. So you always make sure that you keep the evidence and that you keep it safe and that you share it, and that you use that. Rosemary Hunter from the FSCA says that she told the people that she was up against that if anything happened to her from a physical safety point of view, that all of the evidence she had would be released to the public and to the media. So make sure that you have all of that. Make sure you've got a solid support base. Make sure you have faith. Make sure your family backs you. Make sure you have financial support, because what happens in many of the cases is that the big bad corporates or government takes you to court and drags it through the legal system for years and bleeds you dry of all of your funding. So you have to have that legal support as well. Make sure you weigh up the risk versus the reward. I do hope the book serves as some kind of a guideline to whistleblowers who are thinking about it, what's at stake, but also as an encouragement, because these stories are stories of inspiration. And I do hope that it advocates for the possibility and what can happen. You know, as a result of whistleblowing, we've had so much money returned to the fiscus. We've brought down a presidency. We know about the Guptas. We know about all of this capture and hollowing out and evisceration at the NPA, at the police, at the Hawks, at IPID, at the state-owned entities. And we would never know about this if it wasn't for a really good media with incredible sources, but also because of these whistleblowers who've come forward with the Gupta leaks, with the state capture inquiry, and that just goes to prove that whistleblowing does work. And then I had to ask myself a very difficult question at the end of this. And I'm sure that if many of you were faced with this situation and you had to answer the question, could you do it? And it would be great to see a poll on that, is if you are actually faced with the possibility, if you had to blow the whistle, could you do it? I like to believe that I could, but I'm not sure that I would have the commitment and the stamina to actually do it myself. So I like to think that I would. I hope that I would. And I hope that many other South Africans would too, because we need whistleblowers. We have to encourage them to come forward. We have to make sure that people, when they're faced with this question of could you do it, answer, yes, definitely I could and I must, because we have to encourage whistleblowers to come forward. So thank you very much for listening to me for the past hour or so. I hope that you find the book fascinating. And I hope that it shines a spotlight on whistleblowers and applauds them and celebrates them. And we should be celebrating them. They should get national orders. They should be applauded. And we're so grateful for them. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much for that, Mandy. Later in the session, we are going to have a panel discussion. But if anybody has questions for Mandy, and then we're also going to have our second poll. It's, should whistleblowers be rewarded?
Just a comment from my side, if I may.
Okay, are there any questions for Mandy at this stage?
Just a comment. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hey, Jackie here. Hi, Mandy. How are you?
Good, thanks to you, Jaco.
No, very good. Found your previous books interesting and looking forward to reading this one as well. Just a comment from my side around the whistleblowers. I think the difficulty experience with whistleblowers is that you don't have enough information to act on. And really you can only either protect them or use them after you've gone a long way with them and see what was revealed through your investigation. So on that basis, it's very difficult to say, you know, they must be rewarded or they shouldn't be rewarded. I think it all depends on the merits of the specific cases, and you really build up a relationship with them, as you do with your accused, as you do with your witnesses. And it is very much, I mean, you must always treat them as whistleblowers from the start, but they might turn up to be the accused or at least have to testify. And that's where you have the fraud hotlines. It's a corporate governance issue. Yes, it must be there, but as some of the people said, it's something you cannot always be anonymous because you need to test that evidence. The moment you've got a whistleblower, you need to find out, first of all, why is he giving this information? What is his motive? Second of all, you need to test the evidence on its own. And you need to extract more information from him or that person in order to test it. And then thirdly, you have to run it almost independently to see if there's some value to that evidence before you even start your investigation. So on that basis, it's not always a good thing just to say there must be an anonymous tip-offs. But I think where companies do fail is that they try and do it internally, especially the higher up the ladder you go.
Yeah, I think I have to agree with you on that. It's very difficult to do it internally because it does become an emotive issue. And then people get too invested in it. So one of the things I didn't mention is this debate around whether to remain anonymous or whether to go public. And I tell the story in the book of Captain Kirk, who was an e-tolls whistleblower. He worked for Kapsch and he remained anonymous. And he's the one person who I've interviewed who is still anonymous today. And it really worked out well for him. But the feedback that I've got from many of the forensic investigators who work on tip-off lines is that the anonymity is a very difficult thing to manage because you often need more information. It's a process. So that is an interesting debate around whether or not you can blow the whistle and remain anonymous, or whether you are anonymous and you're a deep throat and you come forward at a later stage, or if there is some kind of novel way of keeping the person anonymous, but the investigator can continue to work with them. But invariably, people know who the whistleblower is anyway, because often it's a small group of people who hold the information.
Manny, can I respond to that? So,
I've been waiting for this.
So I know we're going to have a conversation later, but just maybe to respond to this, maybe to start off, it was fascinating to listen to you, but the longer you spoke, the more nervous I became because I had less and less to say, because you said everything I wanted to say. On the anonymity, I mean, it's like we obviously run a hotline for clients, but also internally, and as the ethics officer, I manage that hotline, and we promise complete anonymity. So that's run by a third-party vendor, so it's not our own hotline. And if someone chooses to report anonymously, it's completely anonymous. Not even I can find out who that person is. But to your point, the problem is if they do not provide enough information for us to do a proper investigation, it's very difficult to communicate with them. So there is a way, so I can leave a message for them on the system where they sort of lock their complaint. They get a key that they can use to log back into the system and then answer my questions if they log back in to see my question, because there's no way to communicate with them. So I can't even let them know that I've left the question for them. So from an investigation point of view, it becomes very difficult. And then to your earlier point is that, if they report something and we can't properly investigate it, in other words, not take visible action that they can see that, it's like there was some result, they then believe nothing is done, and that sort of almost discourages them or others then from reporting, because it almost entrenches the idea that nothing is done. It's pointless to speak up because no one ever, either they don't believe you or they don't do anything.
And I'm sure that many of them feel like if they give too much information, it will identify them. So they.
So many of them are not necessarily opposed to giving their name. So if someone reports anonymous, I then usually write back to them and say it's very difficult to investigate, but I give you my undertaking that if you reveal your name to me, then we can have a conversation and then decide together how to take that forward. But to your point, I mean, if it's small, sometimes the facts would sort of identify the reporter. So it's not as if anyone tells you the report is. It's quite obvious sometimes, but it's amazing how many of them are prepared to give their name, once you've given them that undertaking. But it is to start, just to get the conversation going. I think that's the most difficult thing, because the fear of retaliation, I mean, it goes without saying, not only in our business, I think everywhere. Everyone is scared that action will be taken against them. And again, I mean, I think you mentioned that, when you spoke as well, is that I don't know why, but usually what we see, if a whistleblower blows the whistle, the company for which they work almost turn on them. I mean, you said the thing that Sage accepted the resignation, or Trillion then sued the whistleblower, whatever. So it's not the retaliator or the person that the finger is pointed to that the company goes after. They almost go after the one that blew the whistle for some reason, and that's a culture thing. But I mean, we can chat about that too.
I think, Johan, if I can come in there, I do agree with you. And I do write specific policies for companies on whistleblowing as well. But your problem is if that person remains anonymous to you as the person that is investigating it, or the company to who they blow that whistle. Some investigations do take a long time, especially if it becomes forensic criminal investigations. And if you cannot provide feedback to that whistleblower, you run the risk that whistleblower think that you are doing nothing. They talk to other people and say nothing has been done. And the next moment, your whistleblower might turn to the press or somewhere else, which may jeopardize your investigation. So although their identity must be protected, I don't think they must be anonymous to everybody. There must be, at some stage, there must be some independent person that will be able to contact with them.
Okay, can we
sorry, can I just quickly say a word about that? What we're finding is that by far, probably 80 to 90% of the people that contact us tell us who they are, but ask us not to pass on that information to our subscriber. And what's really cool about that is that we can establish what we call the golden triangle, which means that we can communicate with the whistleblower and we can communicate with the subscriber without the identity of the whistleblower ever becoming known to the person. And this shortcuts or short circuits the problem of not being able to get more information, because in a lot of our cases, we have this constant backwards and forwards of information between the whistleblower or the reporter and the subscriber, or the forensic people that are working for the subscriber. And this overcomes the issue of this constant moaning about not being able to access the person because you need more information, but you don't know who the person is. Hope that helps.
Okay, can we take one last question from Thabo Mokete before we move on to the presentation by Brian Adams? Okay, no more questions. So now we hand over to Brian Adams. His presentation is going to be around whistleblowing culture, that a contact routine and ethical desert. So I'll hand over to you, Brian.
Brian, I think you might be on mute.
Thanks, Jan. Yeah, no, can everybody see and hear me now?
Yes.
I don't know why this is, I don't know why this is. Let me just unshare and share again. Oh dear.
We can see a picture of the desert.
Yeah, but I can't move the slides. That's the problem. Let me just see why it's not working.
You can click on the arrow at the bottom. You can't use your cursor.
Yeah, no, I never use my cursor. Let me see why. Sorry, let me just try it the old-fashioned way. Right, is that better? Hi, everybody. Is that better?
Yeah, we can see. Thanks.
Thank you for your help. Yeah, Mandy, thanks very much. That was fantastic. I'm going to be very brief, but I just want to hook onto a couple of things that you said and maybe just add a few more of my own. I think at the outset, I think it's very important, which none of us have said yet, is that I've noticed over the last 21 years that I've been in this game, that there's a nuance between the two types or the two primary types of whistleblowing. And the one is that whistleblowing, as we know it through reporting services, etc., hotlines, whatever you want to call them, it's mostly people that are reporting about stuff that's being done to an organization, where it's people that are reporting about crime and fraud and other skullduggery that's impacting on the business itself. And the one that you've been writing about, interestingly, which is fascinating, is stuff that actually the organization itself or top management in the organization has been involved in skullduggery. And I think it's quite important to understand the nuances, because most of the reports that we get through our reporting service are the former. They're mostly about people that are reporting about Joe in procurement that's involved in some nefarious activities, etc., etc. It's not really about the company that's cheating on VAT or the company that's involved in some major scam. So I just wanted to put that out there in the beginning, and maybe that's something we can touch on a little bit later. But what I would like to say is really what I've come to understand over the last, as I said, the last 2 decades, is that we can try as hard as we like. And I agree with you, Mandy, that there are a huge amount of problems with reporting services. But it's rather like a motor car. You know, you can't stop people using motor cars just because some idiots drive badly or irresponsibly. And what I want to try and touch on in the next minute or two are some of the problems that we do have with companies, and especially some of the big corporates, that are not really behaving appropriately and ethically with respect to their own internal services. And what's also important is you touched on the word tick box. It's absolutely a joke to see some of the organizations that I've come into contact with that purely have a reporting service because it's something on the King 4 checklist or on some other governance checklist, but there's no underpinning ethical culture in that organization. And I don't believe that you can just put a reporting service into an organization where there's absolutely no culture of ethics whatsoever. And about 5 or 6 years ago now, I came up with this idea of the rather grandiosely entitled Adam's Ethics Pizza. And what I discovered is that there are already 8 critical success factors that determine whether a reporting service is going to be a success within an organization or not. And if you'd like a copy, you can just go onto my website. There are some free resources there. But really, there are the 8 critical success factors, the 8 slices. And I'm just going to touch on 1 or 2 of them, not in detail at all, but just to try and reinforce some of the things that you've mentioned, Mandy. And the first one is leadership, or the lack of. And I think that's something that was almost a golden thread through your talk this morning, is that we are never going to get anywhere with leadership, with whistleblowing, if the leaders in the organizations are white-anting the whole process. And you won't believe it that if I even go to some clients, my existing and prospective clients, And the guy said to me, "Can you do ethics for us?" And I said to them, "It's like having a shower. You know, even put the tap on for you. I can even pass you the shampoo maybe, but I'm certainly cannot shower on your behalf." But a lot of people have got this idea that hotlines and ethics and all these interventions are something that you can get a consultant to come in and do it for you. It's got to be embraced as part of the DNA of every organization. It's got to be like a blood transfusion. One of my clients does onboarding where the CEO spends a whole day with every new employee. And that's where the blood transfusion of values and culture and everything takes place. You see, King 4 says, the principle 1.1, the governing body should set the tone and lead ethically and effectively. Sadly, that's not true in many organizations in many cases. And it's just purely a tick box. And that's why a lot of people are very cynical. A lot of employees of the organizations where we provide a service just say it's a joke. It's only in place because, number one, it's required, and number two, so that management and leadership can see who the troublemakers in the organization, who are the ones that are rocking the boat, who are the ones that are not playing along with their phony culture in the organization. You see, it's all about real leaders. And unfortunately, we've got a dearth of that in South Africa. We need leaders like this lioness that are going to get into the danger zone. They're going to be prepared to put their lives on the line and do dangerous stuff, not just sitting in their little corner office in beautiful Sandton with a pretty secretary and all the other trimmings that come with it. We're looking for real leaders that are going to get out there and tackle the challenges that are facing us in South Africa today. You know, sadly, this is a really cool book called Snakes in Suits. And for those of you that may have seen the movie The Wolf of Wall Street, this is the kind of psychopath and sociopath that we're talking about. And unfortunately, a lot of our top managers, it's not me saying it only, it's these guys that wrote this book that are saying that top management are disproportionately more likely to be sociopaths and psychopaths. And what kind of a climate is that to have when your top management in your organization is a sociopath or a psychopath? Do you think he's going to be interested in rooting out corruption in his organization? Of course not. He only wants to know who the bad guys are, the so-called bad guys, who the troublemakers, so that he can identify them and get rid of them. And that's a hostile environment. And many, many organizations in South Africa are hostile. You have this kind of environment where you've got to shout to make your voice heard. There's no, what would you call it, an environment which is suitable or which is, what's the word, I can't remember the word I'm looking for, but it's really an environment which is where people are happy to be able to talk, where people are encouraged to communicate. People have to shout to make themselves heard. And those that don't want to shout, just go and work somewhere else. You see, there's no climate of open communication. There's no open communication encouraged. People are encouraged just to keep quiet, get on with their job. And it's often a toxic climate of groupthink. And if you want a recent example, go no further than Steinhoff. If you read about Steinhoff, you'll see that that was the final nail in the coffin, was this completely toxic environment of groupthink. The other thing which puts people off, as you said, Mandy, quite rightly, is fear. And for most men around here, or people that are confronted with this kind of situation, where your partner comes in and says, do these jeans make my backside look big? Now, the obvious answer is, in this particular case, no, they don't. But sometimes they may do. The question is really, how brave are you to say the right thing at the right time? Are you just going to say what people expect you to say? Or are you going to really stick your neck out and say what's really true in that particular time? And I think a lot of us are just chicken. We just walk away from these confrontational situations because we know, we've got 5 years to go before we go on pension, or I can't get another job, or whatever the case may be. The other big problem, and a lot of whistleblowers tell me, is that they're not interested in even making a report because nothing ever happens. Management sweep it under the carpet. The thing is passed around the board, inconclusive, no proper likelihood of a prosecution, so the thing is shelved or binned. Or there's a big whitewash of especially top management reports concerning top management. They just die and they just disappear. Why? Because often non-executive directors have been involved in that organization for so long that they are actually part of the problem and not part of the solution. The other one is the whole alienation where people don't feel that they're part of the culture of the company. It's not my job. I mean, this guy is a line painter. He's not a branch mover. And how many times do we see this kind of silo impact in the organizations where we live and work? The other thing is ignorance and uncertainty. I mean, if you show these 3 slides to people, you say, what are they? They'll say, oh, they're all beautiful birds. But, you know, how many people can actually tell you that it's a lilac-breasted roller or a hoopoe or a fish eagle? You see, if you go to organizations like I do, and you ask people about the basic stuff, like what is fraud, what is bribery, what is theft, what is robbery, they don't even know. So how can you expect them to report stuff that they don't even know the first thing about? It's like me going to an American football game. I mean, I have absolutely no idea what those guys are doing, running around, wiping each other out for 90 minutes. I have absolutely no idea. 90% of our employees don't have a single clue what they should be looking for. They don't even know when fraud is fraud and when fraud is actually not. And then we have the problem of victimization. You've touched on dear old Angelo. And I feel sorry for Angelo, but I applaud him at the same time. I mean, 90% of all the mafia cases in America have been won or have been broken open because people who were part of the mafia have stuck their necks out and have blown the whistle. So he needs to be applauded. And I can't believe how badly this guy's been treated. I think he should have been given an opportunity to turn state witness, even if he did go to prison for a couple of years, like that other chap at another SOE did, that he needs to be given some credit for the fact that he was prepared to stand up for the good guys. The other problem, of course, we have is that people just run. They go and work somewhere else. They say, I can't be bothered. I'm not going to put my life and my family's life at risk. I'm just going to go to another country or go to another city and go look for another job. The biggest problem we have is, and I'm actually thinking of tongue-in-cheek writing to the president and telling him that we must change our bird, our national bird, to the ostrich, because this is how 90% of us think and behave. We think that if we have a couple of scotches tonight and a couple of allergics and we can have a good night's sleep, that when we wake up tomorrow, magically the whole country is going to be better and different. It's not going to go away unless you and me decide that we're going to be part of the solution. You see, otherwise we just like this poor old frog that Cyril Ramaphosa talks about, where everybody's just blissfully unaware of this massive crisis that we have. So everybody just carries on. They braai every weekend, they braai every Wednesday, they park off in front of the TV, and they just hope that by some magical intervention, things are just going to change. You see, there's vested interests. I tweeted the other day about that old story of When the Lion Feeds, that book of Wilbur Smith. And the truth of that matter is that the whole corruption thing has become so entrenched that there are so many people who have vested interest. So it's not only the lion that gets the share, the spoils. It's all these other people down the pipeline, the vultures and the hyenas and the little jackals and even the smaller, tinier little people that clean up the battlefield. They're the ones that have got a vested interest in making sure that the lion keeps stealing. So we've got to deal with vested interests. And that goes hand in hand with the good old golden handcuffs, where there are so many people that have got such a vested interest in the status quo remaining as it is, that they would be crazy if they blew the whistle, because it's just going to disrupt their very comfortable life that they have. And that's toxic. That is absolutely toxic. You know, I used to work for another big corporate that has just seen its backside recently. And in the first week that I was there, one of the directors met me in the passage, welcomed me very kindly, and then he asked me if I knew what FIFO was. And in my naivety, I said to him, yes, it means first in, first out. He said, no, not here. Here it means fit in or travel somewhere else. You see, that was the toxic mentality of the clique syndrome and the what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas syndrome, where people are building these little cliques and secret little corners. And what it really does is it just white ants the whole ethical structure of an organization. So, you know, I get so passionate about this, I could actually freak out. But I always wondered why somebody didn't do something about that. And then I realized that I'm that somebody. And Manny, things are not going to, in your hunt, things are not going to change in this country until you and I, all of us, realize that come hell or high water, if we are not the people that are going to take this step, nothing's going to change. Now, I'm reminded of that old, quite weak joke about if you think you're too small to make a difference, you've never spent a night on your own with a mosquito in your room. And that's what a lot of people don't understand. That all these people that you mentioned, the Cynthias and the Biancas and all those people, they weren't big, mighty, powerful people. They were just normal guys like us that were doing their job. But the difference between them and us is that they stood up and they said, I'm going to make a difference. I love this picture of this little girl. I mean, it's such an innocent photograph because she doesn't understand that that's a statue. And there she sees this poor guy that's having a big problem. And what is her immediate response? Is to go and see if she can go and help the guy. How many of us respond like that? We don't, because we've now become older. We've got vested interests. We've got all these other things that are happening in our lives. This little kid, she knows what the problem is and she's going to go and help it. And that's the stage that we have to reach. You see, the darkest places in hell are reserved for those who maintain their neutrality in times of moral crisis. And that, unfortunately, is most of us. Most of us are just going to be ostriches. We're just going to park off. We're just going to hope that we can get our visa to go and work in another country or whatever the situation is. You see, we are now approaching the stage now where civil disobedience is becoming not an option, it's becoming a necessity almost. Because Gandhi said it becomes a sacred duty when the state has become lawless or corrupt. And that's where you start seeing the rise of vigilantism, the rise of uncontrolled response from the people. My second to last slide is just the good old classic from Martina Navratilova. She said there are always two people that contribute to a breakfast. The one is the hen and she gives the eggs. The other guy who's really committed is the dear old pig. And are you going to be the hen that's just going to be on the sideline and gives her eggs every day? Or are you going to be the dear old porker that puts his head on the line, his neck on the line, so that you and I can have a breakfast? So as Mandy said, guys, we're running out of time here. It's 5 to 12 or 3 minutes to 12, however pessimistic or optimistic you are. And my view is that we haven't got time. I'm delighted to see that the NPA is finally getting some cases before the courts, but I still think we have to increase the momentum dramatically before we're going to see an improvement in this situation. So I've decided that for however many years I've got left, I'm going to be one of those guys that's going to become an ethics warrior, as in fighter, rather than an ethics warrior that just talks to all these mates on social media, tells them what a dreadful place it is. We have to get involved. We have to make a difference. So all I'm asking you to do is to please shine into the darkness, become the person that you should be, take a bold stand, become part of the solution, and don't continue to be part of the problem. So thanks very much for listening.
Okay. Thank you so much, Brian, for that. Before we run out of time, I'd like to hand over to Dr. Johan Erasmus before we begin the panel discussion.
Thank you, Frenelle. So, it's always worse to be last because everyone has said what you plan to say. So, but fascinating to listen to both Mandy and Brian. I think maybe, having listened to you, the point that I would like to make is that unless we see a culture change, we are never going to get over this whistleblowing dilemma that we currently sit with. So really, we need to start thinking differently about how we react to whistleblowing and how we evaluate the value of whistleblowing. I suppose the downside with whistleblowing is, and Mandy, all the stories that you told, so like Edward Snowden, you name them, it's always a bad story. Edward now lives in Russia. Not that it's bad to live in Russia, but he had to leave his home. People lose their jobs. It's not an easy thing to a whistleblower. At least that's what it seemed like. But we all almost expect someone else to do it. Whereas where we see someone lose their job, and as you say that they're no longer employed and so on, I've never I'm not aware, at least, of any radio station, because it's like not pointing fingers at 702 necessarily, but any radio station starting a fund for the whistleblower that lost their job because they acted in all our best interest. So as a society, we're glad that someone else had the courage to speak up, but we won't speak up ourselves. And I really think that's a culture thing. And part of that culture is because we don't see in companies them complying with that first principle in King that Brian referred to, that says we have to lead ethically and effectively. Because as soon as someone blows the whistle or someone reports something to a hotline or to a speak up line, as I said earlier, it's almost as if the company then turns on that person. The company has to defend itself and say, we have done nothing wrong. You know, the person that reported us either did so maliciously, or they did not have all the information, or, you know, that they're a poor performer and they try to get out of a performance hole, or there's always a reason as to why the company turns on the reporter. And we can only change that if there's a change at the top. And I'm not speaking about the top as in the government. I think it is the top in the company, the business unit where you work. I mean, your immediate team, so like the leadership at each of those levels has to change their attitude to whistleblowers, and almost encourage people to speak up. Not for us to live in a police state where we report on one another, but to give us the opportunity where someone reports unethical conduct, that we can investigate it and deal with it, you know, while it's still in its the starting phase. I mean, it hasn't ballooned into a massive crime yet. And if we start dealing with these small issues and encourage people to speak up about the small issues, I think we may perhaps get to a point eventually where we stop the bigger issues from occurring. I mean, tone at the top is a big thing, because tone at the top determines the mood in the middle. And you referred earlier to 2,000 people speaking up about PPE frauds. And just when you said that, I thought to myself, I think the only reason why suddenly people were prepared to speak up is because of things like the Zondo Commission and you know, the public prosecutors starting to go after people. We see people being arrested and dragged off to court for things like the asbestos scandal and so on. So finally we see action, and I think that's an encouragement. And then that's a culture change already, is that, you know, something is being done, and that's why people are prepared to speak up. Then I think, you know, when it comes to culture, there are two other things I think that we also have to consider. The one is support to the whistleblower. And both of you have touched on that. So how do we support the whistleblower to make sure that they are in a good position, they don't lose their job? And so for them, and if you look at the legislation, both the DPA, but also so like that whistleblowing section in the Companies Act and a few other pieces of legislation, almost everywhere it says that if you are retaliated against or you suffered negative consequences as a result of blowing the whistle, then you have a claim against that party that caused the loss. But no one ever says that we'll pay your legal bills, or we will fight that fight on your behalf. You know, so I'm like an employee of Deloitte. If I blow the whistle on something that I see in this firm is supposed to pay my legal cost if I suffer any damage, because I don't have the money to take on a big corporate. It's just a fact. So I can maybe spend the little that I have to go see an attorney, and they're very expensive. But then I'll quickly drop out of the race because I just don't have the funds to fight, you know, the big machine. So that's the first thing. I don't think we support whistleblowers. We encourage them, but we don't support them. And then the other thing is, I don't see consequences for the people involved in these issues. I mean, we've heard of many scandals over the last number of years. I mean, Eskom, Estina, Steinhoff, I mean, you name them. But the leadership there almost get away scot-free. I mean, we don't even know who the directors of these entities were when these frauds you know, occurred. We know about Marcus Jooste, but I mean, that's the one. But who were the rest of the people in charge? What are the consequences? You know, number one, for the people it's like that have to set the tone, and then secondly, and I think more importantly, if If you blow the whistle and you are retaliated against, in other words, you are not being promoted, you're no longer invited to meetings, or you never asked for your opinion, or you lose your job even, what happens to the retaliator? What action is being taken against that person that caused you the harm after you have spoken up? And unless we address all of these issues, I don't think we will ever create a culture where we speak up. Unfortunately, what I see often is this unconscious bias of a conformity bias, where you just go with the flow. You know, it's like you see something happening, no one else speaks up. So why should you speak up? It almost becomes the norm not to speak up. And then the wrongdoer then starts to believe that it's okay to do wrong because no one ever tells them that what they do is wrong. So that conformity bias, I think, is a biggie. But for me, unless there's a culture change from the smallest level, you know, to the highest level, I don't see light at the end of the tunnel, unfortunately. Let me stop there and leave some time for our discussion.
Okay, thank you so much. Before we start the panel discussion, Mandy, I'd like you to ask one question so that somebody can win a book. I forgot to do it earlier.
Like any question. Like, what was my
Any
son
question?
wearing when you walked into the room?
Any question on your presentation or?
What is the name of the trillion whistleblower who wrote to Andre de Ruyter?
Okay, so I'll leave that for Chris to let us know the winner at the end. Okay, so in terms of the panel discussion, I'm going to go through a few questions that have come up in the chats and things that investigators want to know about, especially. So the main question that people are asking is, does the Protected Disclosures Act adequately protect whistleblowers? If not, what is the way forward? What about those whistleblowers that are complicit but then blow the whistle? Is the biggest problem the shortcomings of the Protected Disclosures Act, or is the bigger problem the enforcement of the Act? And will a new Act really make life easier for the whistleblowers? I know you touched on that in your presentation, but if I can get an idea from the panel members.
I'm happy to start. So the feeling that I get from the whistleblowers that I've spoken to, and I spoke to many lawyers who deal with this as well, is that the Protected Disclosures Act should be completely overhauled. And that is my feeling. You know, I think it was Suzanne Daniels said that it's not worth the paper that it's written on. I think it's very limited in terms of what it covers. I think we need a wider piece of legislation that doesn't just apply to employee-employer relationship. I think we need something that's more practical. So that would be my suggestion, is that there's a new piece of legislation. I did give the book to the Justice Minister, Ronald Lamola, to read. So hopefully that has some kind of impact. But I think we need to see a much stronger drive from civil society on this. For a potential piece of legislation that is broader, that is related to a corruption strategy that encourages whistleblowers to come forward primarily in the fight against corruption.
Andy, if I may add, so I completely agree with you, but I think what's missing in that act now is what support will be given to a whistleblower. Yeah. You know, every time it says if you report in good faith or you had reason to believe, you know, whatnot, you know, that you are entitled to compensation, but at no point do they ever make clear, you know, what form that compensation takes. And it need not necessarily be financial, but you know, what does protection mean? If you say protected disclosures, you know, what do we mean by that? I completely agree with you. Also, to limit this to sort of like employees or any particular category, I think is slightly silly. I mean, one should encourage broad civil society, anyone that sees something untoward, to be able to speak up and make that disclosure to any range of parties, and for all of them to be protected.
Absolutely. So I tell the story in the book of Simpiwe Mayisela, who worked at the PRC for 2 months and landed up blowing the whistle inadvertently. And he has just been completely bled dry through the courts. He's relied on the PDA, and this matter's been going on for years, and he's just lost all his money from having to pay lawyers, exactly as you mentioned. And that for me is the biggest failing of the PDA, is that it doesn't provide that support. You're entitled, if successful, to 2 years worth of compensation, which doesn't cover anything, essentially. So there needs to be some kind of function where you are given financial support or protection, legal support, psychological support. I mean, all of these whistleblowers I spoke to are seeing psychologists on a regular basis, which is also expensive. They literally cannot pay for the roofs over their houses. So there needs to be some kind of border protection.
I just come in quickly. My problem with the Act is that the protection is only really retrospective. I always use the example of a spouse that gets a protection order or an interdict, and her or his partner arrives on a Friday night, drunk as a skunk with a 9mm in his hand, walks up to the house. She takes out the interdict, waves it through the trellis door and says, "You're not allowed to be here." And he promptly puts a bullet in her head. That's the lack of value of the Protected Disclosures Act. If you don't mind that rather gruesome example, because the Protected Disclosures Act doesn't help any whistleblower at that particular moment in time. It might help them afterwards when they're recovering in hospital from the gunshot wound, but it's not going to help them when they're actually out there, right there on the ground. So what you said earlier, Mandy, about these whistleblower houses or whistleblower or witness protection programs, it's absolutely fundamental. We're not only talking about the big cases of whistleblowing, that, like the state capture kind of stuff. I'm talking about stuff on corporate level, where people have been killed recently in South Africa because they've been stirring up the muddy waters within corporates. So we have to get really serious about this. If we're serious about whistleblowing and serious about creating the right kind of atmosphere and climate, we've got to get serious about providing the right kind of protection for people.
Yeah, because without that, it's like, as Mandy said, I mean, it's like, why would I choose to report? Because every story that I hear is, it's like someone with a gunshot wound or died or lost their job or doesn't have a roof over their head or whatever. The stories are never good. I mean, you never hear of anyone that reported something that's been applauded, in Parliament and thanked profusely, or unfortunately. So we almost want to leave it to the next person to report. I think you must have a lot of guts, to take on the big machine and report. It's a scary thought, but I really think it takes a lot of guts.
So I do make a point in the book. I try and tell the stories of some positive outcomes, where people have almost leveraged becoming whistleblowers into a career and become social activists. So I tell the story of Imran Mukadam, who blew the whistle on bread price fixing in Elsie's River. And he lands up becoming a social activist, although of course there is a negative where he's lost his family business and all of that. Patricia de Lille is an example. She became a cabinet minister for standing up and revealing the de Lille dossier, although many would blame her for Bashiri fleeing the country at the moment. So I try and find the stories where there are positives, because my biggest concern and my biggest fear is that people will look at these stories and go, I'm never going to do that, because look at how they've all ended up. They've either ended up dead or, losing everything. But you have to see the positive and encourage people because of the enormous contribution to civil society that is made.
And it starts small, I think. It's like in every business, we have to create that environment or culture where people can speak up freely, even if it's just to ask a question. I saw something and I'm not sure whether or not it is fine. And that we answer those questions, because if we create that culture sort of at a micro level, I think it makes it more likely for someone to speak up where they see something big happening, because they've experienced throughout their career, or however long their career is, that there is support and protection for people that speak up. And speak up should not be the wrong thing to do. You shouldn't be isolated by all your colleagues the minute that you speak up. I mean, it's like that conformity bias is a devil, because it's like no one wants to be that person. And unless we change that culture and like do what they suggest in King, is that we lead ethically and effectively. If that tone is not set from the smallest business, to the highest level of government, unfortunately, I don't see a change. We'll only see it where people have a lot of guts and perhaps deep pockets.
Okay, that's a good point. Another one of the questions relates to, like, as we had the poll related to whether or not whistleblowers should be rewarded. From the poll, it was 67% yes, 6.7% no, and 26.7% not sure. So the question is it recommended that compensation be considered for whistleblowers when requested? What are the challenges if you take into consideration the great cost it is to whistleblowers? But also, you also have to look at the other side of it, where whistleblowers make false reports just for the benefit to receive. How do we navigate that part of it?
I hope you don't mind. I just put the results up because I don't think we shared them earlier. Just to remind people, I think it's so interesting. I didn't expect this. I didn't expect such a high percentage response that people would be in favor of rewarding. I find it fascinating, and I think that a lot of people wouldn't agree with that. I'm undecided, to be honest. I haven't quite decided whether or not it's the way to go. I think that it needs to be so tightly regulated. If you look at the way that other things have been, if you look at the road accident fund and the way that that's been, abused, I think that it does open up a lot of room for abuse in this country, and people pursuing vendettas. But we need to find a way. Maybe if one of the suggestions, Frida, I think your microphone might still be on. One of the suggestions is that a percentage of the recovered money goes into some kind of organization, into like a whistleblower house and funding some kind of civil society organization. Other people have suggested that each sector of business funds their own supports or kind of NGO. I think there are various options to look at.
Mandy, I also can't make up my mind. It's like also in two minds. But then, I think to myself, so if my cat goes missing, and I put up little posters in the neighborhood saying that there's a reward if someone finds my cat, there may be a few chances, and they may waste my time because it's like I'll drive around and go look for the cat wherever they saw my cat. But if one person finds my cat, I'll be really thankful and prepared to pay that reward. So I don't know. I mean, it's like it may lead to a lot of extra effort, investigating and so forth and so forth. But if it leads to that big fish, maybe it's worth it.
You just look at the case of Bianca Goodsir. You've got somebody, 1.6 billion rand has been returned to Eskom, and she's sent over 2,000 job applications, and she can't get a job. And she has cashed out her pension to support her daughter. It just doesn't make any sense from that perspective.
But for me, also, I asked the question, where's the employer in this? So if she used to work there and now she doesn't any longer, why are they not phoning her constantly to ask if she would come back? I mean, who wouldn't want an employee like that? So I'm always wondering, where are the employers in this? Why are they not stepping up and set the right tone and say that we don't get rid of whistleblowers? Quite the contrary, we treasure them.
Can I just also say that I share your views on this? I'm also still sort of sitting on the fence. The one thing that we must definitely not do is do what one of the major banks did. I don't know if they still do it, but what they used to do is they used to have a monthly draw. Or everybody who had made a disclosure, their name would go into a hat. And then one of the names was drawn and a huge amount of money was paid to them. As somebody said to me, this is the prize that they'd like to get, but the one they wouldn't like to be presented with. Because you can imagine the massive incongruence of that whole idea, because you're just pointing a finger and saying to somebody, or saying to the group, if you want to victimize the whistleblower, here he or she is. I mean, it's crazy.
That's crazy. That's properly crazy.
Rewarding people.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry, Fernand, I think maybe the terminology here is also important. It's like, is it a reward or is it compensation? It's like, because I think if it's a, yeah, I don't know. Again, yeah, I haven't made up my mind.
I think they're different.
It's not, absolutely, I think they're different, yes. Sorry, Fernand.
Okay, I'm going to ask, because we actually had a number of questions, but we're reaching the end of our session. I think it was a little bit short for this, this topic. But one of the other questions is, what is your view on companies and organizations offering amnesty periods or reduced sentences for employees to come clean and disclose their wrongdoings?
I'm in favor.
Are you in favor?
I'm totally in favor of that. As I said in one, I'm in favor of not a blanket one, but on merit, like we had with that, I can't remember that chap's name now, one of the other SOEs. He got 5 years imprisonment because he became state witness. So if that's what we're talking about, I'm in favor of that. I'm certainly not talking about what was misreported, what Julia Madonsela apparently said, which she didn't say, was that there should be a blanket amnesty. I'm not in favor of that at all. But on a case-by-case basis, if a person does stick his hand up or her hand up and becomes part of the solution, then they should be given an opportunity to turn state witness and have a reduced sentence.
So I find this an interesting thing. Number one, if there's an amnesty, I mean, it pertains to wrongdoing that I'm responsible for. So I sort of almost blow the whistle on myself without any consequence. But the thing that I find interesting is in the Companies Act, the whistleblowing section there says it applies over and above the PDA. So it doesn't replace anything. It's like almost in addition to. And it very clearly there says if you reported or you blew the whistle in good faith, that you will not suffer any civil, criminal, or administrative liability. Which is a blanket thing. I mean, so like then if you did so in good faith, then the state can't go after you in terms of the Companies Act. So if you blew the whistle in terms of both the PDA and the Companies Act, then that should strictly speaking apply to you. But then again, I don't think many people have read the Companies Act. So I'm not sure how many people know of this section in the Companies Act. It's not fun reading, let me tell you. But be that as it may.
So I do think you have to draw a distinction between an amnesty and some kind of a plea bargain, as you said, right? So I think that if you are going to come forward about your own wrongdoing and hope to get some kind of amnesty, I'm against that. Also, I'm against this idea of a corruption amnesty. I've written about it extensively. I think it would just be like giving up and saying that we can't cope from the MPA's perspective, and it's a failure of the criminal justice system. So I'm against that. I'm obviously in favor of, like I think it's VBS that you're referring to, where the CFO entered into a plea bargain and got a reduced sentence. And we know with organized crime, we have to use people who have got a proximity to wrongdoing, who are complicit, who get a lighter sentence. It's the way that we crack these syndicates. So I'm in favor of that, but I'm not in favor of an amnesty, like me coming forward and saying, oh, I was involved in this fraud, I'm telling you about it, so just wipe my slate clean. No, I'm not in favor of that at all.
So Manny, I just want to ask, so would that not then, so like if you were then, in the proximity of where the fraud was committed, or you were party to that in to some degree, if that's the case, does that not prevent me from blowing the whistle? So even though I know, so like I was party to the fraud in a small way or a big way, but if there is no sort of amnesty or I don't know what the right word is, but I mean, it's like, would that not prevent me from reporting then? So only people with completely clean hands, would then be protected if they report. which I think makes the pool quite small. I mean, it's like we wouldn't have known about all the Basasa stuff had it not been for Angelo Agrisi.
So let's use this hypothetical scenario. So if Angelo Agrisi was the only person doing wrong, if he had come forward, then I don't think he should have got amnesty. But because he's kind of spilling the beans on all these other people, then he should get a lesser sentence. It's the same with the Criminal Procedure Act, this concept of Section 204, where the judge has to decide if you are telling the truth honestly, then you do not get prosecuted. I mean, we saw this with the Keppel hitmen. It's the craziest thing ever, where people stand up in a court of law and say, we murdered this guy, he drove to his death 3 times, we shot him, and then we go home to our families at night, so we don't do any jail time. That surely must be flawed in some way.
Crazy.
And then also just to your earlier point about blowing the whistle and being a witness, I completely agree with you there. I mean, we have like loads of legislation in this country that encourages or obliges certain parties to report a suspicion of fraud or corruption, even where they ought to have suspected fraud. In terms of the Prevention and Combating of Corrupt Activities Act, for instance, or the Financial Intelligence Center Act. And in all those pieces of legislation, it doesn't say that you have to have conclusive proof and have to be able to, to bear witness to this. You only have to report it so that the authorities at least know that someone, saw smoke somewhere and that they can then investigate and so on. And that's the authorities' job then. So the whistleblower is not the prime witness or should ever be, I think. I mean, the authorities should investigate and build a proper case as they would under normal circumstances.
You see, a lot of investigators think that they're going to get a docket which is nicely wrapped up, ready to go to court. It's not like that. I mean, often you get a snippet of information which you just park, and you get another snippet a week later and you just park it. And eventually, like a jigsaw puzzle, eventually the picture emerges. So, you're not going to get these open and shut things delivered. I got it once at my house on my front door. When I opened my front door on the Saturday morning, this file fell into my hall. And it was somebody that had done a whole lot of work, and he put this whole docket together. But that's happened once in my life. Most of the time, it's a little drip feed of information which builds up this picture.
Alternatively, you can just buy Mandy's book. I mean, that's also a shut case, if you will.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry, guys. We've reached the end of our session. I'd like to give the panel an opportunity for closing statements as well.
I have a request before the end. Is it possible to do the last poll just as a closing?
Yes, I know. Yes, the last one was the question you wanted, eh?
Yeah, I'm just really curious to see what the outcome is.
Okay.
The question for the last poll is, could you do it? If you were faced with it, could you blow the whistle? Your options are yes, no, and never too scared.
While we're waiting for that, as you probably heard, I'm quite a keen whistleblower myself, until I got a couple of nasty phone calls because some guys didn't like what I was saying, and they were able to trace my cell phone number through LinkedIn, through my profile on one of the social media channels. So, it's not always plain sailing out there. You get these nasty nutcases who will even dredge up photographs of my granddaughter and threaten me that something nasty might happen to her. So yeah, it's not a nice place out there.
There we go. Wow, that's pretty impressive. But again, I mean, you are the converted.
Very good.
That's very good.
Okay. So as I was saying, Brian and Johan, do you have questions? So that we need 2 more people to win books.
Sorry, I missed that. It broke up a little bit.
Do you have a question?
It's Yes, you put us on the spot for now. So what is the name of the principal piece of legislation in South Africa that is meant to protect whistleblowers?
Okay, my question is, who's the author of this wonderful new book called The Whistleblowers?
Okay, so while Chris sorts out who are the winners of the 5 books, I'd like to take this opportunity to ask the panel members to give closing statements.
I'm happy to go first. So, sorry, Brian.
No, go for it. Go for it.
So for me, you know, before I wrote this book, I never realized what the value of a whistleblower was. It wasn't something I knew what the value of sources were as a journalist, but not of whistleblowers. And this has really opened my eyes. This experience of sitting with people, it's the human narrative. So, you know, we see people in court, we see them at the Zondo Commission, but we don't know the human value and their narrative and the dark places that they go to where they're on their own and they are left. And there's an amazing quote from Masilo Motepo in the beginning of the book, which for me totally encapsulates it, where she speaks about how she hates the word whistleblower. She doesn't like the term whistleblower. It's impersonal. It's like a shadowy, faceless, voiceless person in an underworld who has no family, has no soul. It's almost a ghost. But I guess it's a whistleblower because most of us are anonymous. We don't get awards. We don't get money. We are heroes. We are warriors. And you need to recognize that. It goes on, but this is it, is that we need to recognize who whistleblowers are on a personal level. They are mothers, they are sisters, they are people, you know, they have aspirations, and we need to remember that. And we need to change that mindset. You know, people don't like a tattletale. That's how we're taught as children. But we need to have that societal revolution so that we can change the way we treat whistleblowers, so that we can draw them out from the darkness into the light, because it's the only way we are going to fight fraud and corruption and get some kind of semblance of good governance. And you know, we have to stack the cards in their favor.
Go, Johan.
Yeah, maybe just to repeat what I said earlier, I think it's up to all of us, and I'm not only us on the call, but as South Africans, to build or rebuild an ethical culture where we celebrate ethical behavior and we call out unethical behavior, however small. Because unless we create that culture, we will never reach a point where we celebrate, you know, sort of the big whistleblowers, if you will.
Yeah, thanks. It's been a pleasure being with you guys. I just want to underline what I said earlier, that the key to this is the top management setting an example, living the example, expecting nothing but the highest levels of ethics from everybody they come in touch with, leading on the ground, setting an example through osmosis, through where people can see it, look up to them and say, that's the kind of leader that I want to work with. That's the kind of man or woman that I want to emulate. And I would really say that that's the key, that those people are the ones that are going to set the example, that are going to create the climate where we can really build this new South Africa that we've been desperately working towards. So thanks so much for the opportunity to be part of the team.
Okay, I'd like at this point to, on behalf of the ICFP, thank the panel members for a very thought-provoking session. I think as investigators, going from a certain point of view, we don't realize it isn't as clear-cut as it seems. Maybe we also don't look at the great personal cost that it comes to whistleblowers, you know, because we just want to get the investigation done, find out who did whatever. But I think the session has allowed us to look at the human factor that goes with it. Yeah, and also as well as the ethical part. So in terms of organization setting the tone at the top, that is something that will take us forward much faster. So at this point, I'd like to hand over to Chris in terms of the winners of the books event to close.
Thank you, Fernell, and thanks to Johan, Brian, and Mandy. Mandy, once again, thank you. Yeah, the answers came in quick. So the first question was, who are the sponsors for today's event? And some of you got it totally wrong, and some got it half correct. So the sponsors were Sanlam and the ICFP, not only the ICFP, not only Sanlam, but both the ICFP and Sanlam. So once again, Sanlam, thank you so much. Christine, your team, appreciate it. So the first winner there was Masekolo Poppy Senchu. So we will send you an email and contact you for delivery of the book. Second person was Zora Wahed. And then the third, second question, what is the name of the trillion whistleblower? Now, there's a lot of people that answered, but the spelling were incorrect. So I had to be honest there. I could not take the wrong spelling, the first person. Sorry, there was a few incorrect spelling.
You had an audit.
I didn't audit, yeah. So I had to be totally independent and objective here. So the person who got it right there was Bianca Goodson. So Mafundu Matwetja. So I hope I've got that correctly, but we've got your email. The fourth person, we asked the question, what was the principal piece of legislation to protect whistleblowers? And that's a Public Disclosure Act. So and the winner there is Alexander Ellis. So Alexander, congratulations. And the last question, who's the author of the book, The Whistleblowers? And obviously, everybody knows that's Mandy. And the winner there is Elroy Africa. So congratulations. Okay, so that concludes our day. Thank you, so everybody. The ICFP will be in contact for your CPD certificates. If you haven't registered for tomorrow's session, please do so. And in terms of Wednesday session, we might stream it live with OFM. We're organizing that, but we will contact you in that regard. But thanks a lot and keep well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Mandy.